always try to match a child with a narrative that they might think they could relate to. I mean, that is a great gift, because if you can give them the gift of reading, that's half the battle of education. It really is.
Do you want to start off by introducing yourself, Alex?
Okay, my name is Alex Wheatle. I'm the author of, oh my gosh, I've lost count, around about 13 or is it 14 books. My debut novel was Bricks and Rock, published in 1999. I followed that up with East of Acre Lane, and then Seven Sisters / Homeboys. And my first three novels were basically based on my lived experience living in a children's home and living in Brixton in the late 70s, early 1980s. In the last few years, I've concentrated on young adult fiction, which has been very successful for me. I started off with Little Bit, that was published in 2015, I think it was, and I followed that up with Crompton Nights, which won a few awards. And my latest novel is Cane Warriors, which is a historical novel set in Jamaica in 1760.
Wow. When I was looking on your website and I just saw the kind of list of awards that you've received, it's pretty incredible. So I want to ask you, the kind of text that you were exposed to growing up and the kind of literature that you were reading growing up.
Well, it wasn't too much, to be honest. When I was very young, when I was 6, 7, 8, in a children's home, there were lying on the dormitory floor comics and magazines. And so I greedily read them as much as I could. It was like an escape for me. And so I grew up on the Beano magazine, Whizzer and Chips, The Dandy, and Shoot magazine, which is a football magazine. And a little bit later, there was the odd book. And I remember reading Huckleberry Finn when I was about 9, or was it 10 years old or something like that. But novels were very hard to come by in the children's home. We was never taken to the library. And so all my reading material was mainly sport related or comic related. That the older boys would sometimes leave discarded under their beds and so on. But definitely comics and magazines, that was my reading material when I was very young.
Wow, I mean that's incredible that you're able to now write these incredible books, and you had very limited amount of literature early on. So the main reason why I wanted to reach out to you was obviously you're very successful in becoming an author and a great role model to many. What I wanted to ask you is, we've now come to a point where change really does have to happen, and change has to happen long term, and for the better. And I wanted to ask you, what kind of changes do you think need to promote that equality in our society, to encourage more Black students, Black pupils to follow in your footsteps and become equally successful?
Well, the first thing is that young Black students need to see writers like myself being visible, and so they know that a career that I've chosen is attainable. And obviously, I struggled. I wasn't published until I was 36, even though I was writing from I was a teen. So it's very important that that young Black students, wherever they are, can see something so they can become it, or even visualize themselves being that person or having that career. And I think today, when people are demanding change, I don't think it should just be like authors. I think when you look at publishing houses, you need to consider who's marketing those books, who's acquiring those books, who's around the table at acquisition meetings, because that can be a traumatic process if you're an editor trying to champion a book and you're sitting around a table with marketing people, publicity people, and sales teams in different countries and so on. And so we need a presence at that table, and we need a presence throughout the publishing house. So that is where I would like to see change, and not just in publishing houses, but also in the spaces where books are reviewed, like, for instance, newspapers, people who blog, radio. I mean, sometimes during lockdown, I was, sometimes I was watching daytime television, and I hardly see any Black authors appear on those shows like Loose Women and What You Have in the Mornings. I cannot remember the name, Mrs. Britain or whatever it is, or Good Morning Britain. It's very rarely you see a Black author popping up and speaking about their experience, speaking about their works and so on. And so we really need to be represented on those platforms as well. And for me, that's a change I would like to see. I'd like to see us writers, I'm talking about my industry, more visible. I mean, we do have Mallory Blackman, who's an incredible champion, but even she, sometimes I struggle to see her on mainline television programs and so forth. So we need to increase our visibility. That's a major change I would like to see. I'm very encouraged, actually, because there are some writers coming through. I just read Daniel Joando, her debut novel, and she's very young. She teaches alongside me at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I think she's going to be a huge star. But then there are others, like a good friend of mine, Peter Kalu, who's been writing children's fiction for many years, but he's never had that exposure. It seems that the print press have just ignored him. I think he's an incredible writer, but he just gets ignored. And that is the story of many of my kin. When it's ignored, they're not reviewed in the Sunday Times or the Sunday Mirror or the Daily Mail or the Telegraph and so forth. So I think another change I would like to see is that publishers need to look for different ways of how they can promote their list rather than the same old. And I think with online platforms now, there's a lot of them. I think publishers need to look at the possibilities of how to get their work out there to young people, because at the end of the day, young people are not really picking up The Guardian on a Saturday morning, are they? And so how do we reach them? That's a major change I would like to see, that young adult novels and children's novels are marketed that so much better than they are presently.
And I have to agree with you. I mean, I've taught for 16 years, and I taught Mallory Blackman, Pick Up Boy. But I have to say, the number of texts that we were encouraged to teach was limited, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's something absolutely that needs to be more visible. So you were saying that when you were younger, you read a lot of comic books. At what point did it change for you where you started getting into novels? How did your early experiences obviously weren't necessarily giving you that opportunity to write those novels. You obviously made that happen for yourself. I mean, at what point did that change? How did that?
I was an avid reader, Zuzu, when I was young, from about 6 to around about until I started secondary school. My reading dropped off, and so I never captured it again until I was 18. And at 18, I was living in Brixton, and I was lived at the time of the tumultuous, the Brixton riots of 1981. And so I served a term in prison. And I was very fortunate because my cellmate, he was an avid reader. And so he managed to get me reading again. And one of the first books he presented to me was The Black Jacobins by the great C.L.R. James, the legendary Trinidad writer. Because I was searching for my identity. I really wanted to know something about my history and my Caribbean heritage. And so The Black Jacobins taught me a great deal about that. And so I kind of reconnected with my kin, if you like, my fathers, my mothers, and my ancestors. And so that book really helped me kind of reconnect with who I was, my identity. And after that, I was very hungry for books relating, anything that I could find that related to myself or the colour of my people. So I really dipped into the bag of the Harlem Renaissance writers, people like James Baldwin and Richard Wright. I remember reading Langston Hughes, the fantastic poet, and Chester Himes, the crime novels that he wrote. And I was captured by them, and I just gobbled everything up that I could whilst I served time in prison. And when I left, I immediately went to Brixton Library, maybe 2 or 3 days later, and I carried on my reading education. And from there, I was reading everything. I was reading the Iliad, I was reading Charles Dickens, I was reading the Bronte sisters, and so on. So that really was the education for me. It opened up my eyes. So no longer was I the narrow-minded Alex that entered prison, where I just had a narrow view of the world. In a matter of 1 or 2 years, my vision in my head of so many narratives was worldwide, and that was incredible for my education. And also, I searched for something that I could relate to in South London, if you like, my lived experience. And I couldn't really find that, not from a British author. And so I listened to reggae a lot. I was a massive reggae fan. And also Linton, the great poet, Linton Kwesi Johnson, he lived in Brixton and he performed in Brixton. He is very well known. And his poetry, his dub poetry, that reflected my life. And that's when I first felt that I could maybe contribute to this, to the whole narrative of my life and my friend's life and the way I was raised and my lived experiences. Linton Kwesi Johnson, listening to him made me believe that maybe I could contribute also. And so that's when I really put pen to paper, not just in song lyrics or raps, what I used to do when I was 17, 18, 19, but little short stories. I used to keep a journal of things that I observed day to day in Brixton, and I used to write about it at night time and add to that journal. And later on, that turned into Brixton Rock, and that was obviously it's published a lot later, but at least I had a start. I think the biggest hurdle for me was to get over the barrier that my life is valid and that I can contribute, I can become a writer. That was an enormous barrier for me, because sometimes when I would inform friends that I want to write a book, they would laugh. They say, you need to work on a building site or something, or take a job in an engineering shop or something like that. But I always had it in my mind, I went back to my comics that I remember when I was 7, 8, I wanted to publish a comic magazine or something, So I went back to that childhood kind of dream of actually contributing something, writing something. And even though I was in a working class area, and even though there was police oppression and all the rest of it that happened in Brixton in the late 70s, early 1980s, I did nurture that dream of one day seeing anything that I produce out there, and that kept me going over the years.
Oh, you've made me feel very emotional, Alex. I'm tearing up here. Do you know what really struck with me there was you said one book in prison changed things for you. And if anything I've learned tonight is just how important the kind of literature that we expose children to is so important. And what you've just said there about how it's important for you, for your identity, that's incredible. And then, how you say, it's almost like you did a full circle and coming back to the comics that you were reading at a younger age. I mean, that's incredible. And wow, I wasn't expecting this tonight.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I have come full circle, because my latest novel is The Cane Warriors, which is basically set on a real slave revolt that occurred in Jamaica in the St. Mary Parish in 1760. And so the influence of C.L.R. James runs through me, because I want young people of all kinds and shapes and creeds to know and be aware of this history. I mean, for example, you do not need a statue to remind everyday folk of what Queen Elizabeth achieved and King Henry VIII and the Duke of Wellington and Lord Admiral Nelson. It's there in the history books, and children grow up with it in school. But I believe that in the Caribbean, my ancestors, there were heroes there also, and they should also be celebrated. And it occurred to me that, the Chinese, the Far East, the Orient, they have their heroes too, just like they do in Africa, just like they do in the US of A. And so why can't the Caribbean have their heroes visual so people are aware of them and they can read about them and they can learn about them? So that's what inspired Cane Warriors.
Wow, that's incredible. If you were to say something to new teachers or current teachers, what word of advice would you give them?
The word of advice I would give to any teacher is to always try to match a child with a narrative that they might think they could relate to. I mean, that is a great gift, because if you can give them the gift of reading, that's half the battle of education. It really is. If you can just engage that child, because without a child knowing it, if they read well, it means further on they will study well. And because they study well, then they will progress and they will maybe go on to university or whatever and get a job that they enjoy performing. And so it all starts for me with reading, having a very good reading education and fostering that. And it should be, at first, reading for pleasure and getting an experience from it and learning from it. Because young people, when they read books, they're learning about boundaries, they're learning about what is acceptable and what isn't. They're learning about all these life skills and so on in a safe way. I mean, there's nothing safer than reading from a book rather than, the tough kind of sometimes life experiences that my characters have or live through in my Crompton series. But young people they don't have to go to those spaces or those environments. They can learn about these experiences within a book, which is fantastic, which they can enjoy and laugh at and be sad and be happy and all these other emotions that human beings have to experience. So books can offer that, I think. And I just want my legacy to be that, I just want to pass it on how narrative, comics, books and so on, what they have done for me. I want to give that as my legacy to young people picking up an Alex Wheatle book. Hopefully one of my books can inspire somebody out there, a child out there, to push on and progress and be what they want to be.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and useful. In the comment box below, please put a question or a comment about the video. To grow our community more and help other teachers out there, please subscribe to the channel and share our posts and videos. Thank you.